Our guest this week is Aaron Stark. After growing up in painful, abusive conditions, Aaron went on his way to an atrocity as he planned a deadly shooting spree on his Denver, Colorado high school until simple acts of kindness changed his life forever. His TED Talk, I Was Almost a School Shooter, has more than 14.4 million views. Today, his mission is to let people know that no matter how dark it may seem, there is light coming and that we really are not alone. Aaron Stark, welcome to Next Steps Forward.
Thank you for having me.
No, we appreciate your time today. Aaron, you have such a shocking and poignant story, and yet, sadly, one that's more common than we'd wish. You described your early childhood as extremely chaotic and violent. What or who was the cause for that trauma?
It was mostly my family, and then the environment that family created. My early life, from birth to 5, I described like living in a Stephen King movie. Extreme violence of every kind. With my birth father, every kind of abuse you could possibly imagine, and I witnessed it and was part of it. It's every kind of abuse. If you think of how bad it could be, it was that. And then from 5 on, when mom left, my father got with my stepdad, and it went from Stephen King to more like Scarface with crack cocaine and crime. And this was during the height of the crack epidemic. And we were very nomadic. We moved from place to place a lot. Early on, it was from running from my father. Then it was getting evicted. Then it was running from police or authorities or anybody trying to get and investigate us. And so I went to 30 or 40 different schools. I never stayed at a school longer than 6 months. I was constantly the new kid, constantly getting bullied by all the different groups of bullies at school. And it didn't help that I was dirty and fat, and smelly, and I didn't have clean clothes. I was the dirty, toxic kid. And as I as I grew into my early adolescence, I kind of adopted that as a survival mechanism. Like I became the toxic one in order that my family all lied and stole and fought to get what they wanted. So I did that. I spoke that same language of anger, and as I grew into 10, 11, 12 years old, I became the dirty, toxic one. Like I became the fat, smelly, angry kid. And that was who I was. Like that was my personality. And if you at that time came into me and told me that, no, you're a good kid, then obviously you're lying. You don't know who I am. And as that grew older, that toxicity at home just fed my own negative self-image. And that combination just spiraled and spiraled and spiraled until I was in my teens. And by this point, by the time I'm 15 years old, I've been homeless for a couple years already because I couldn't live at home with all the drunken, drugged out fighting. So I was living on the streets, bouncing from place to place. And I had taken to cutting myself. I described my life back then like I was living in a giant tsunami of pain. Just this big, like giant. I didn't really have any agency or any control over my existence. I was kind of living in whatever. I didn't have any control over where I lived, didn't have control over what I ate, I didn't have control over where I slept. It was all just kind of dealing with the anger and anguish around me. And I felt like I was just sloshing back and forth. And sadly, cutting myself actually became a normalizing thing. Like it was a grounding in a way. It was my emotions that I could control myself. And even though it was destructive, when you're living in that kind of misery, it just becomes your normal. And coming up to 16, 17 years old, I was really, really bad. I was cutting myself extremely bad, and I was living in the shed behind my only friend's house. I had pushed away a lot of my other friends. I didn't really have a lot of friends in teen years. I got to back up just slightly, because I had what I call disaster groupies. They were kids that lived around me that they weren't really friends. They just kind of like saw me as like a dark unicorn. They wanted to push farther into the dark, like see how far they could push me. And they wanted to like live vicariously through my own damage. And when we would sit around and talk, instead of talking about girls or sports or movies, we'd talk about killing people. We talk, if you were going to kill 10 people, what would you do? If you were going to shoot up a school, what would you do? And looking back, it seems like it was a bunch of really depressed kids trying to navigate depression without any adult supervision or any kind of rudder at all. But at the time, it was like a really toxic in-person internet group is the way to look at it. Like just pushing the toxicity further and further, boiling away any bit of humanity. And so that was the environment that I was in from around 14 to 16, 17 years old. And then it culminated finally when I was in my only friend's shed, and I was sleeping in his shed because his parents wouldn't let me be in his house anymore. And he would sneak me out food. And his name was Mike. He lived the opposite end of the house, of the block that I did when I was 12. We met when I was 12. He was 10. Bonded over comic books. He lived the exact opposite life that I did. Like he had a very stable family, very loving. His parents still live there today. Like he went to college and all of his dreams were supported. Like that kind of very just normal, happy life. And so it was his shed that I was in. And I was cutting myself so bad that I had a giant pool of blood underneath me. And I thought, if I don't do something, I'm going to die. I got to get myself some help. And so I actually got up the next morning and called social services on myself. I knocked on his back door and got a phone book from his mom, called social services on me. And they set a meeting up for that day. And so that was dawn that I called, but the meeting was later in the afternoon. So by the time I get there, I borrowed a bus fare to get there. It was across town. And they also brought my mom in. And so they sat me down at a table with all the social workers and like, so what's your problem? And I tell them that I produce a bloody razor blade and I throw it on the table. I'm like, this is my problem. I feel like I'm nothing. And my mom got them to believe I was making it all up. They sent me home with her because she got them to believe that I was just doing it for attention. And so we pull away from this place and she turns to me and she snarls and says, next time you should do a better job and I'll buy you the razor blades. And I just, okay, you think I'm a monster before? I'm going to dive into it now. I went on what I call my scorched earth time. Like the next 9 months of my life were just as much destruction as I could get into that time. If you were positive to me at all, I was going to do everything I could to offend and destroy that relationship. I was going to be as toxic as possible and burn every bit of positivity in my world down. And in that time, I did stuff like I went into my family's houses and burned all my pictures and like tried to eliminate my own past. And after 9 months of burning my world down, I was alone. This time I'm in the field behind Casa Bonita, the restaurant from South Park. You ever watch the show South Park? They did a whole episode on that show, on that restaurant. And so I was behind that restaurant, sleeping in the field. And it was the middle of the night. And I'm like, I got to do something. I had no supports left. I had burned every bit of support I had left. And I'm like, I got to do something or I'm going to die. If I don't get myself help, I'm going to die. And so across the street from my school, I was nominally at, there was a place that said mental health. And I didn't really know what it was. I just knew it said mental health. And so I went there cold. I knew that last time I went, I warned somebody, that was just ended so bad. That was the most toxic thing that ever happened to me. So I went there cold and just went to see somebody. And I went and saw a young lady, and she was early 20s, I believe. And I don't really remember much of that conversation because all I remember is the end. Was when she said, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do. I can't help you. And I walked out that door and my brain broke. Like at that spot right there, when I walked out that door into the night, I felt my brain shatter like a mirror. And I found out what was underneath all that tsunami of pain. When you go all the way down to the bottom of it, it gets really quiet and still because there's not anything left to care about. And there's nothing left to lose. And right there, all my plans crystallized. I already knew what I was going to do. Like I already talked about it with all those disaster group friends. I was either going to go in and attack my school food court or the mall food court. And the only difference in that was going to be the time of day I got the gun. I knew where to get a gun because this was mid 90s. There was gangbangers all over the place. And this was pre days where there was metal detectors in schools. So they would come and bring guns into the school and flash them all the time. And so I knew where to get one. And they knew I wasn't a narc, of course. I slept in the field and they saw me in the park. And so I went to him like, hey, can you get me a gun? Hopefully one that shoots a lot of bullets. And the guy's like, yeah, sure. Give me an ounce of weed. And I'm like, all right. That was the easiest part because this was mid 90s. So I just went to my brother's friends sleeping on my mom's floor, stole one out of his pocket, took it to the guy. And he was like, all right, dude, give me 3 days. And that was it. I was set. And as soon as I got that, I was going to attack. And so in that time, I think I was saying goodbye. I don't really remember. Looking back, I think I was saying goodbye. Like I was closing off relationships and being much more nice and much more friendly and giving away my comic books, which was the only things I ever cared for, stuff like that. And I went to Mike's house and he opened the door and he didn't know what I had planned at all. He still didn't know till I came out with my story. He didn't know what I had planned. But he saw the pain that I was living in. It was his shed that I was sleeping in. It was his. He was sneaking me down food. He saw for years that he knew what I was going through. He brought me in, and he was like, "Dude, you're gonna be okay." He used to tell me, "You're a good kid in a crap world." And he sat me down, and he gave me food, and it was like reestablishing the tiniest bits of being a person. Like it wasn't hanging out with a friend. It was actually we're being reminded like, oh, I can like things. Like I can enjoy food. Like I can like a movie. Like just reestablishing the bare minimum of humanity, that I can exist and enjoy things. Because at the time I thought I was just a walking ball of destruction. I was just ready to blow up and die. And like it was just part of the plan. I was just gonna everything was gonna blow up and I was gonna blow up with it. And that was gonna be the end. And it like pushed back the wave of destruction, like set the clock back on my humanity. And he treated me like I was a person when I didn't even feel human. And it was the most cathartic thing that ever happened to me. Dude's still my best friend to this day.
You talked about early abuse and every type of abuse. Was it from your father, from your mother, from both, from neighbors?
It was my mother and father, my birth father a lot. My birth father, there was a lot of abuse. Like we had the very first permanent restraining order ever issued in Colorado was on him. Like I have memories of walking into the kitchen and seeing him raping my mom, him hiding under the table when we got home from the grocery store and jumping out and attacking her. Like just the lots and lots of extreme physical, mental, sexual, every kind of abuse. But that's birth to 5. So the very first memory of my entire life, where I start in my life, is me laying on my bloody mom's body while I looked up at my father while he has a tire iron in his hand. And I'm screaming, "You just killed my mom." Now, she wasn't dead, but I thought she was. And that's where I start. That's 0 for me.
That's a hell of a place to start from. Had your father ever been diagnosed with mental illness?
He was a Vietnam vet. So my father, by the story that I know is by the time that I was born in 79, and he came back in, I think, 76, 77. And by the time he got out of the military, he was a monster. He left a nice guy, from what my mom said, and came back just a demon. And it was just, I don't know if he ever got diagnosed, because I didn't have any contact with him as I grew older. Last time I saw him was when I was 15, and I told him that if I ever saw him, that'd be the last time he ever saw me. And that was, ever since then, I can't. That's too toxic.
You described the relationship between your mother and your father. What kept your mother from leaving him?
I think it was codependency and fear. With my father, it was blatant physical fear. Like he tracked us down and kidnapped me and my brother and would beat her and follow her. Like, he was actual physical terroristic fear of my birth father. Of my stepfather, it was codependency. It was feeding each other's addiction and feeding each other's depression, and that kind of, and the crack epidemic. When crack is a terrible drug, and that causes, not only does it cause extremely toxic trauma bonds, but it causes very, very toxic codependent relationships.
You told Unsinkable's Jodi Caro during an interview for a story that she wrote about you that, quote, whenever anybody would get too close or would get evicted or someone would get caught with something, we just vanish and end up in another state, end quote.
Mm-hmm.
Two-part question. What does a lack of stability, moving from place to place, I think you said you're in 40 different places or 40 schools, and being uprooted, sometimes without any warning at all, due to a child's self-esteem and sense of security? And then the second part, how do other children tend to treat the new kid who looks at a place and doesn't quite fit in?
So yeah, that absolutely happened to me a lot. There was multiple times in my life where I got a duffel bag thrown at me in the middle of the night saying, "You have 15 minutes, grab everything you can, we're getting out of here." And that's the time that I would just grab my comic books. I would just take those and go. And I think that the effects that has are drastic and long lasting. It gives a sense of impermanence. I thought that I was a nothing. Like, by the time I was a teen, I would walk around and ask my people around me, "Do you remember me if I leave the room? If I walk away, do you remember that I was here?" And I thought that I was a void. Like, that you lose the sense of permanence, the sense of ownership over anything. Like, the stuff, nothing I had. My parents were criminals in the sense that they would steal. My stepdad would rob delivery trucks. Like, they would go into toy stores. They would literally take the entire shipment off the toy truck and go and sell it at the flea market. So there were times where I would have a Christmas where I would go into the living room and have every single Thundercats toy or every single He-Man toy, including all the play sets and everything, like all of it, like the whole shebang. If you would have spent money on it, it would be hundreds of dollars in toys. But then 3 days later, someone would throw a duffel bag at me and say, "You have 5 minutes to grab your stuff." And the only thing I would have time to grab are my comic books. So all that stuff would vanish. None of that had any meaning or any permanence. None of the material stuff mattered because none of it was going to stay. It was all going to go away. And if we went to a house and I liked the house, 3 months later would be evicted and the house would be gone. And so none of that, I didn't get any of that kind of object permanence with any of my stuff. And as I grew older, it became to the where I am now today a very, very easily satisfied person materially. Like, I don't want a lot of stuff materially. I don't keep a lot of stuff. I'm not a collector. If I have something and you like it, I'm free giving it to you, like that kind of stuff, because to me, the material things are very ephemeral, and it's the experience is where it is. So when I give presents to my kids, I give them like concert tickets, and I give experiences. You'll have memories, because the material stuff isn't going to matter. And that was like beat into me early on, that all of the reality can shift instantly. And I think that not having that, to have any kind of stability, can make you lose so much of yourself. That's why I valued Mike so much, because Mike was, I call him my island of normal in an ocean of chaos. Like, I was sloshing around in this giant sea that I didn't have any control over, and I was flipping back and forth, but he was always there. I memorized his phone number because his parents never moved. So everywhere I would bounce from place to place, he was home base. And if I came back to Colorado, I knew exactly where I could go, that I could have a meal and a shelter and someplace, a friendly conversation for a bit, even if it was only for a day or two. And like, I had a friend there, and it was the only one. Everywhere else, I had people that said they were friends, but they just wanted to watch me blow up. Or I had people that wanted to look at me like I was a project. I was either at that time something to be feared or something to be fixed. And neither one of those are a person. And Mike was the only one that saw me as a person and as someone that actually deserves it.
Earlier, you talked about bullying when you're growing up as a teenager. Is it fair to say that the root cause of most, if not all, school shootings is bullying?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say that the root cause of it is pain. I would say that the base of a lot of these destructive things are I'm not good enough and I'm going to burn my world apart to make myself fit. And that pain at the bottom of it, when you get to that level, there really isn't any difference in that pain as there is with when there isn't any difference in the pain that I was feeling when I was going to show up at school and the pain that a model feels when she's in a cup in her car throwing up in a cup before her photo shoot. There's not a difference there. It looks like two different species, looks like two entirely different animals. At the bottom of it, it's that same sense of self-immolation that I'm not good enough. I'm going to burn me apart. And when we're grown up early on, we're taught how to express our pain differently, and we use different languages to express that pain. I call it the languages of depression. When as a boy, violence is currency. When you're a boy and you're early on in school, you can be dumb, you can be ugly, you can be smelly. If you can break something, you can exist. If you're strong enough to break something, that's social currency in the male world early on, from the earliest of ages. So as you're growing up and you learn to speak that language, if the language that you're taught at home reinforces that, and if, like for me, I was taught lying and stealing and aggression, and if you're taught that early on, and that coincides with the aggression that you feel that you need to express when you're a kid to keep yourself from falling down into the social pit, then that vocabulary of depression will grow as you get older. And boys tend to express themselves more violently because of that. We get more aggressive, we get more destructive. Whereas females, women, tend to get more introspective. It's more that I'm not good enough inside. I'm not good enough. They don't like me for me, so I need to change my body. I need to change my insides. I need to change my hair, my weight. I'm that kind of self-destructive, but it's still the same. It's still on the same tree. It's just different languages. So if you look at, if you ever heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're at the very bottom of it. You need to establish the thing that I fell off the cliff of when I talk about Mike. You need to establish the very bottom of I need to be able to eat, breathe, live, base survival in order to want something. If I want something, I can dream for something, and if I can dream for something, I can aspire for something. Take that concept of the pyramid, flip that upside down. Take that same triangle and just flip it, going on down to a point. That bottom point is pain. That bottom point is I'm not good enough, and I'm not enough for me. And as that expresses and grows up, that top plane, that top flat part, that's where all the different languages express themselves, where we have the pain of the model in the car, the pain of me in this side, the pain of the gangbanger who's trying to fit into his clique, the pain of the businessman who's embezzling and has a massive alcoholism because he's trying to fit into his own corporate world. That all of these look like they're different species, but if we can see that at the bottom of it, it's really the same language, maybe we can start having more of a bipartisan attitude towards it. Because I've had the same conversations about this pain with every walk of life, whether it's atheist, Republican, Democrat, religious, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what spectrum you're from, you feel that pain inside yourself.
We almost always hear interviews after a mass shooting in which people say, I knew that guy was weird, or I'm not surprised he did it. What's the answer to identifying potential shooters before they become actual mass murderers? Listening
to the people in the dark. That's the key. And it's first off, remember this fact that nobody ever starts in the pitch black. Nobody ever starts in the pitch black. Even the worst monster you can think of got there. It was a journey. Even someone like Dahmer started as a kid. He didn't end up as a monster by starting there. You know, that's the kid who like the Parkland shooter didn't start at 3 years old ready to shoot the school. You know, there's a life there's a whole gradient level of progression that takes you to that spot. And while there is a small amount of people that will follow through with that act, the very small sliver of people that are going to follow through with the violent act, there's a large gray amount of people that think that they could, should, or might. And those are the people that we absolutely can reach. And we can do it by listening to them in their own, when they're screaming out when they're pain. When I would bounce from school to school, if I had that one counselor who actually saw me as a person, then maybe I would have a bit of a connection. But my problem was I also had the added problem of being shuffled away from that assistance as soon as it tried to get in. But the one thing that saved me was consistent kindness, and that saw me as the person and not a project. because that it's equally depersonalizing to see someone as a threat and as a project. If you see the person underneath the pain, see the me that's behind the screaming language of depression that I'm yelling at you. If you can look past that and see the me underneath it, then we can talk. Like for counseling, if you go to a counselor and you have the counselor who has the checklists and the systems and the programs, that could turn into white noise immediately. I'm just a product to you. But you go to a counselor on the other side, it's like, oh, you like that band? I like that band. Let's jam out for a while. Then after that, you can get the same checklist, the same process, the same systems. You're just listening now, because now this person is a human. And this person sees me as a human, and I'm not just his job. I'm not just a checklist. So the biggest key I can give someone is to just listen. Remember that you feel that pain too, and that there's just different levels of it.
Well, I want to personally thank Mike for seeing you as a person. So thank you, Mike.
Yeah.
Aaron, in the first part of the show, you talked about turning yourself into social services. You told us how that went. I imagine you have some suggestions to improve the social services system to better protect children, especially as homeless teenagers. Can you share some of those ideas?
I do have some good ideas for that, I believe. First off, I think that separating the children from the parent to do the interview is massively important, especially when the parent is potentially the abuser. That if that would have happened in that incident, my whole story might have ended up differently. They having more open areas for people to go into counseling without having potentially life exploding responses. Like I described going into counseling for a kid in depression like walking into a room full of spikes that are all pointed inside. Like you don't know that one thing that you might say when you're venting could potentially cause a mandatory reporter to have to say something that could blow up your whole existence. And like I was talking about speaking the language of depression, if at your home the only thing you're taught is anger and insults and how to deal with depression is by lashing out, then when you go reach out for help, if that's what you do when you're first reaching out for help, and you're trying, let's say you're a kid who's raised in that kind of environment I was raised in, and you go to a counseling office and you sit down and you're like, man, in my head, I just feel like I just want to blow up the world. That instantly could cause a ton of instant reports that could blow up your entire living situation without full investigation. And it could just be that you're just trying to vent without knowing the proper vocabulary with how to vent. And it's very perilous. It's a sad fact, but even if you're living in hell, that hell can be normal. It can be your only thing you have. And the thought of exploding that can be so terrifying that you just avoid the help altogether. So the chance of having that happen, that you say the wrong thing that's then going to cause, even though it would have potentially been a benefit to me, if I would have reached out for help and thought at any time that help was going to cause my own mom to go to jail because of what I was going through, then I would have avoided that help entirely, and that would have been struck off the list, because it's going to blow up my only world I have. I'm a teen. I don't have anything else to go to. I don't have any other support. You're going to put me in the system. There has to be a middle ground where you can equalize it, because once you do have that middle ground, and once you're able to equalize the equation, then you can actually see on both sides the necessity for whatever measures need to be had. Like if you had a situation like mine where you really did need to be removed from the home and this needs to happen, you can equalize that in conversation and have and be able to accept that, yes, now we need to move forward, and when we need to address this on a much more strict, much more professional level. We need to actually address this with authorities and go through that route. Or you could assess on that front that this is a kid who's just trying to express, who's been taught a really crappy way on how to express his own emotions, and I need to assess it in that level. And having that be, instead of turning it into a room full of spikes, make it just a more soft landing. And you can accomplish the same kinds of goals. You can accomplish the same kind of overwatch, but without so much resistance and so much fear from the people trying to reach out for help in the first place. because it's so fearful. That's the hardest obstacle I have. When a kid who's reaching out to me for assistance or reaching out to my group that is just screaming out for help, and we try to send them to a counselor, it's hard to get them to even go to a counselor because they don't think the counselor is going to listen, or the counselor is going to blow up their whole world because the counselor is trying to overreach. And it's hard to have that kind of middle ground where both sides can see the person as a person, because it's just as important for the counselor to see the person in pain as a person as it is for the person in pain to see the counselor as a person. That normalizes the equation. If you don't normalize that equation, then you're just going to talk right past each other. And then the help is useless in the first place.
When and how did the idea of attacking your school come to your mind?
That formulated so the attacking the school and attacking the mall food court, it's important to note that neither one of those places were actually the targets. That was the damage that was going to cause my targets to hurt. The targets was actually going to make my parents deal with creating a monster. I wanted to make my parents deal with making me. And so I was going to cause as much damage as I possibly could and die while doing it. And it's important to note also that both of those places, neither one of them were what we would describe as soft targets. There were armed uniformed police officers in North High at all times. It was pre-metal detector days, but it was still gangs all over the place. There was cops in the school all the time. And there was literally a police station in the mall, a couple doors down from the food court. So it was just factored into the plan. I was going to go and attack and die by suicide by cop.
Most people would be horrified to think those thoughts, but you said before that they created a sense of calm in you. Do you think that's how it is for other young men who eventually go through the mass shooting?
So the calmness came from embracing the darkness. It's the scary calm at the end happens when you literally don't have anything left. When you lose all your supports, and when you've lost all grasp of your humanity, and when you hit that very bottom level of depression, it's very calm. Because what are you going to do? You're going to cut my arm off? I'm going to die. You're going to put me in jail? They're going to feed me. Like, I don't have any more down. And that's the scariest place to have someone at. That's this place where they can do anything. There isn't anything they can lose. And it's important to remind people that they actually do have things that have worth. And in order to have something to have worth, that means you care when it's gone. And when you have nothing at all that you care if it's gone, including your own existence, that's a really, really terrifying place to be. The comforting thing in the beginning of wrapping that darkness around me like a blanket and using it like a shield, when I describe it like a comforting calmness in darkness, that happens when you find that depression is seductive, chaos is seductive, that kind of darkness is seductive for a while. It's also extremely self-destructive and non-self-sustaining. So everybody wants to be the lead character in their own movie. When you in the beginning of life, when you're searching for your own identity, if your identity is I'm the evil dark one that everybody looks at like I'm some kind of unicorn, for a little bit that gives you a little bit of I'm somebody. People are looking at me, until you see what they're looking at, and then it just it spirals down. And so in order to exist in that world, people can tend to, and I did, embrace that identity and use it as a shield. Like, yeah, I'm the dark one. Yeah, I'm the evil one. What are you going to do about it? Like, you want me to prove it to you? I'll be toxic to you too. And it's just performative toxicity. And we see it right now in our social media. We see that performative toxicity all over the place. People nowadays we have what I call the negative social economy, where we have people who will tell you how to be a bully, then give you tips on being a better bully, and then give you rewards for being the best bully, and then give you accolades for being the absolute best one. And so you get the same kind of social adulation that you're craving. I really believe at the heart of it that everybody wants to be held and told that you're okay. We all just want to be held and told we're okay. And if you're getting that by someone saying you're going to be okay, but to be okay, you have to be terrible to that guy, then you're going to be terrible. And that social cycle happens. Take, for example, let's look at examples of, we have, like, take me, okay, take what I'm doing now. What I'm doing now, I go around and I speak about mental health. I give public awareness. I'm just a regular guy. And since I'm doing that, I get social accolades in the sense that people want to have me on their podcast. Occasionally I get to be on TV. Occasionally I get to do a cool interview and get to fly out to go speak to people. And yeah, I get to do cool stuff because I'm being nice and helping people out. So this positive world, I get cool accolades for that. Now look at the negative mirror of that. Let's say that you're somebody who is harassing an abortion clinic enough to where they close, or you are harassing an FBI office and trying to attack the agents inside the FBI office. Okay. Now, in the negative social economy, there's going to be the people who are going to be rewarding you for that and applauding you for that. And if you're really, really good at it, you're going to get the celebrity of you're the best one at it. And the whole social negative social world is going to know who you are. And the 4chans and the incel groups and the Reddits and all the YouTube forums, they're all going to know who you are. And although you're going to get that same social adulation. And those places are not islands. And those aren't unconnected. It's a giant social web network that is working. And it's you get the same kind of thing. And that's my personal biggest opponent right now, doing what I'm doing, is that negative social economy. I'm trying to bring people out of the darkness by saying you matter and that you can make it, and that we need to give love to the ones that we feel deserve it the least because they need it the most. And people on the edge, we can pull them back in and show them that they matter and that they can belong. And they're saying, no, the edge is where you want to be. You want to come off the edge and into the dark, because over here in the dark, this is where everybody agrees with you. And that right there, that's the battle.
School shooters are obviously in a great deal of emotional pain. And I've heard so many people say, why didn't he just shoot himself? Or why do you have to kill anyone else? You've lived with suicidal ideations and thoughts of killing others. What do you think is the answer to those questions?
The languages of pain scream out differently. You also cannot impose logic on an insane person after the fact. When I was doing what I was doing, I was an insane kid in an insane situation doing insane things. And you can't look back on that logically and say, well, why didn't you go this way? And well, because that didn't exist to me. Like people have a want to have closure, and they really want to have. I want to be able to make sense of this kind of thing, and you want to be able to wrap your hands around it. There's some things that you can't make sense of, and that's, in order to understand it, you have to understand that you can't make sense of it, which is the only way to make sense of it. That you have to understand the obliqueness of the situation. That pain is personal and individual, and if you think that there's a stereotype of a shooter, you're wrong. If you think that there's a person who that kid looks like he's a school shooter, examine what made you think that that's what that looks like, because it's probably a kid screaming out in pain, hey, help me. And your own perceptions and your own fears have colored that. And like I've said many times, it's equally depersonalizing to be a monster as to be a project. Equally depersonalizing.
You eventually went to the people who had hurt you, not in a confrontational or accusatory way, but to tell them the way their actions had affected you. Why was that important or necessary for you to do? And why don't you just say, to hell with them, and never think about them again?
Because it was important to me. I called that my acknowledgement phase, and I did. I went to the people that hurt me, and it wasn't to say you did this and you need to pay or any of that. It was that this is our situation now. Our relationship has fundamentally changed. It's different, and that's just the way it is. And it wasn't all about their response. It was about getting it off of me. It was about releasing it off of my own psyche. That I have done that. I don't have the things where I wish I would have said that. I don't have the regrets that can build up about how, man, if I could have just said that one thing to that person, they would have known how I felt. No, I said it. Now you know how I felt, and now I can move forward. Having said that, that's done now. And now I don't have to sit and dwell about, well, if I would have said that, they would know this. No, I said it and they know it. And now I can move on. And now there's other things in life that don't involve that. And to me, it was an important cathartic moment, because I saw so much of that toxicity just spiraling and spiraling and spiraling. And it just continues and it festers. And it's that backbiting. This person insulted me, so I need to insult them back. And now that's happened. And now they're going to insult me back. And it's a complete cycle back and forth. I tell my kids it's the contest. It's what we call it in my house. It's the contest. There's no need to be involved in the contest. There's no need to be involved in that social contest. Step out of that contest. Say, okay, you want to win? You can win in your own world. You don't want to like me? Don't like me from that side of the room. That's perfectly fine. And you're okay. And I'm going to just keep on doing what I'm doing. And as long as you understand that I don't care about what you're feeling, then we're good. And in order to not care, you actually have to not care. Like that's an important, people say, I don't care what you're feeling. When in reality, you're sitting there, you're stewing about it. You're like, no, I don't care, man. They're going to, if I could just, no, I just don't care. I don't care about you now. And I'm done. And to me, that was an important step. I went to them like, no, I'm sorry. I don't love you. That's done now. And I'm going. And they would, sometimes they would yell, sometimes they would cry, sometimes they would get all angry. And I didn't care. It wasn't about their response. It was about me saying it and then go. I'm done. And it was like a weight lifted off of me. I was able to escape that cycle of backbiting, regression, and repression and infighting. And I was able to step out of it.
After the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting in Parkland, Florida, on February 14th, 2018, in which a 19-year-old killed 17 people and wounded 17 others in the course of 6 minutes and 8 seconds, you applied to share your story. I was almost a school shooter on the TEDx TED Talks platform. Why did it take another mass shooting for you to apply?
So actually, it was a bit of a process to get to the TED Talk. So we were watching the Parkland massacre the day after. I was watching it with my wife and my oldest daughter, and we were having a big tearful cry about how could someone ever do this? How could you ever get to that point? And then they were crying about talking about that, I was watching also on the TV, and a girl came on, a student from the school, and it looked like she still had blood on her from the attack. And a reporter was asking her, how did that make you feel? And I was just enraged. Like that's the most depersonalizing thing. Like how do you think it made her feel? And so I literally went to the toilet and wrote a Facebook post. I sat on the toilet, wrote a Facebook post. And that's the first time I came out with, I was almost a school shooter. That was the opening line of the Facebook post. And by the time I came out the toilet, my wife and my daughter had read it. And at that point, my wife only knew about 60% of my story. My daughter only knew about 20% of my story. And so that day was a big tearful revelation talk with me about my history and everything that I actually had in my life. And up until that point, I thought it was going to be a negative. I thought that if anybody ever found out this about me, there would be like a millstone around my neck. People would hate me and I'd be an outcast. Like it would be another dark mark on me. And I went to bed and I woke up and that Facebook post went Facebook viral. We got a couple hundred likes and shares on Facebook. And my wife's like, hey, you might want to send this to our local news reporter here in Denver, Kyle Clark. He does Channel 9 News. We watch him every night. And they're doing this thing about mental health at the time because of the shooting. And so I sent it to him over Twitter. And the very next day, they had a camera crew at my house to film me reading that Facebook post. And that video got 17 million views in a week. And I went from a dude sitting on my couch thinking that if anybody ever found this out, they would hate me, to getting messages from literally all over the planet that weren't just, hey, that's a cool story, but it was, hey, that's a cool story, and here's everything that ever happened to me. Here's all my pain and all of and I got diaries from people all over the planet, everywhere. And that's when I started my You Are Not Alone group, and which turned into initially a place to put everybody at. So on Facebook, so where everybody responding to me, that's where they could go like filter it. And that ended up becoming full of counselors and doctors and therapists and people in pain, and giving them that little bit of a buffer spot where they can talk openly about this stuff. And a guy can get on there and vent and get a response from a therapist who's just a person. And you're just talking like a person, but you're actually an actual doctor and you know what you're talking about. And so you get the professional response with a personal approach, and able to actually push it up to a professional response if need be. Like if you really need to talk to an actual therapist right now, we can get you someone to at least try to help you get to where you can go. And so that's how that ended up going. And then as out of that, one of the people in my Facebook group was like, hey, you should apply for a TED Talk. And so I did. And at the same time, I also have to say, I also went through a big physical change at the same time. And when I started my journey, I was 500 pounds. Well, yeah, when I first wrote my Facebook post, I was 500 pounds. And today I'm about 260.
Wow.
Yeah, I've lost about 240 pounds about. And both from a weight loss and from weight loss surgery. I had gastric sleeve surgery. And on the stage of my TED Talk, under my shirt, I had bandages for my weight loss surgery. I literally did them all at the same month. And so it just came very cathartic. I didn't expect the TED Talk to be as impactful as it was. And then all of a sudden it just blew right up. And now I get to talk to people all over the planet and try to help them see that they matter.
And I guess just
I still also work full time at a gas station. So
knowing how much you went through physically, mentally, how long you endured that. To your point a moment ago, you mentioned your wife knew 60%, your daughter knew 20. You had people from all over the planet reach out to you. Do you ever regret sharing your story so publicly?
No. And it's cost me a lot. It hasn't all been good. There's been a bunch of negatives to it that came with it. Like my family stopped talking to me. My mom is still alive. My brother, my sisters and all that, my aunts, they all stopped talking to me, not because I am saying something wrong, but because I'm talking about the family. Like I'm talking about it publicly. And so my response is always, well, first off, I'll stop the instant you tell me one thing I'm saying that's not the truth. And if you're mad about me talking about the truth of what happened 25 years ago, but you're not paying attention to who I am today, then I'm not the one that has an issue. And so that's it. I've lost friends. It made it hard to get a job. It made it hard to go when I was, I'm the kind of person that I like they say in that movie Wayne's World, I have an extensive collection of name tags and hairnets. And so I've worked food service a lot. And so when I would go to a food service job, I would normally be like, oh, will you please be our manager? Okay, well, please take over the restaurant. And so that's usually where I was. I have a long resume of food service. So easy to get a job in that industry. And then all of a sudden I was trying to apply for jobs and the places that normally would jump all over it weren't. And I was like, well, what's going on? And I asked one of them, like, well, we Googled you. So okay, first thing if you Google, first thing that comes up is I was almost a school shooter. But if you don't click on the link and see, again, if you don't look at the person beyond the label, and if you don't scratch the surface to see who I am beyond what you think that it is, then it'll be off-putting and it might be repulsive. But if you scratch the surface, you actually see that it's me. And so it cost a lot, but I wouldn't change it for the world. I've been able to help. I have an inbox full of messages of people saying that somehow I've helped them keep breathing for another day. And that's all I need. I'll keep on going as long as if I can help someone like that, then I'll keep on going until they don't have a voice.
We have just a short time left. What's your call to action for our audience?
Give love to the ones that you feel deserve it the least because they need it the most. That one that you think of that is different as the other, that it looks separate than you, has way more in common than you could ever imagine. And remember that we are all going through this life together and we can make it through it together. And you are not alone. You are not alone.
And again, where's the Facebook group? Where can they find you?
It's You Are Not Alone. It's all one word. It's all put together. You Are Not Alone. You can find me on Twitter at @StarkDad1313. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook. Google me. I'm all over the place.
Aaron Stark, thank you for being with us today and sharing your story of despair turned to hope and inspiration. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on here today.
And thank you to our audience for tuning into this week's episode of Next Steps Forward. I'm Chris Meek. For more details about upcoming shows and guests, please follow me on Facebook at facebook.com/Chris Meek Public Figure and on Twitter at @ChrisMeek_USA. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time, same place, with our leader from the world of business, politics, public policy, sports, or entertainment. Until then, stay safe and keep taking your next steps forward.